To be honest, when I first heard the story, I remembered my mother. She has also worked in an office of her whole life. So for me, this isn't just a story for the sake of use. It's about real experience, about how easy it's to write someone off. I want people to recognize themselves in this and draw conclusions in time. Everything related to companies, names, and details is fictional and replace the focus on the essence.
I knew something was off the second he called me ma'am. Not the polite kind of ma'am either. The slow, condescending version, drawn out like he was talking to a waitress who forgot his fries. We were in the middle of a team briefing, reviewing final export compliance for the BX Core rollout in the EU. I just explained how the IP shielding clause worked, how the patent still resided under our trust until the mutual consent form was filed. Callan leaned back, grinned, and said, "Thanks, ma'am, but I think we've got it from here. Let the new generation take it from here, all right?" Everyone laughed. I didn't. That was the moment. Not when they escorted me out later. Not when HR handed me a folder with the word transition stapled on top. It was right there, in that smug little smirk. That's when I knew. He didn't understand the system he was walking into. Worse, he didn't care. He thought legacy meant old. He thought process meant slow. He had no idea that the thing holding this company together for 3 decades wasn't tech. It was me. And if you're still here listening, do me a favor. Tap that subscribe button and like the video. Most people don't, and honestly, it means a lot to the team behind this. Keeps these stories coming. All right, back to the mess. Brechtel Systems used to be small. I started in '91, back when our whole office was a converted car dealership in Akron. I was the only woman in engineering for 8 years. I didn't scream for credit. I just outlasted every one of the men who said I'd never make it. I was the one who found the loophole that let us file our first thermal conversion patent ahead of a French competitor by a single day. That patent kept us solvent through 2 recessions. They called me the quiet engine, never in a flattering way. It was their way of saying, she won't fight you, but she won't let you win either. And it was true. I didn't need to be loud. I just needed my paper trail tight. Every design review, every notarized filing, every dotted I, my initials sat beside them. You learn that in this world, people don't read the fine print until it's too late. So when we began developing the BX Core in 2012, I made sure we filed through a shielding trust. Not for control, just protection. The tech was cutting edge, variable state energy compression with onboard load modulation. If it ever left our hands unsecured, it could bankrupt us in licensing violations. My plan was always to transfer ownership after the final approval. But then, they forgot to ask me. Literally. No formal request, no legal prompt, no signature. And then Callan Roy came crashing in, swinging buzzwords like a sword. Agility, disruption, decentralize. All while gutting the R&D archive I spent half my career building. The man deleted 900 gigs of archived prototype documentation, called it decluttering. I asked him once if he'd read the BX Core patent lineage. He said, "We've got people for that." Well, I was those people. When I got the calendar invite titled Organizational Refresh, I already knew. No agenda, just check in with CEO. His assistant looked at me with pity when I walked past her desk. 32 years in that building, and that's how they did it. Callan had his lines rehearsed. "You've done incredible work, but we need to move faster. The board supports the transition. Let's talk next steps, maybe a consulting gig." I stopped him there. I closed my laptop, folded my hands, said nothing, because Callan didn't understand what I already knew. The moment I walked out that door, Brechtel Systems would no longer legally own its crown jewel. That $950 million valuation they flaunted at investor dinners, propped up by a patent they never finalized, and they didn't even know it. So I smiled. Told him I appreciated the honesty. Then I left my badge on the table and walked out, quiet, still, but the storm hadn't even started yet. 3 days before the licensing summit in Geneva, the one we'd spent a year preparing for, Callan summoned me to the glass fishbowl they called a conference room, the kind of place designed more for optics than discussion, light flooding in from every angle, zero privacy. You could see the interns pretending not to watch from the hallway. I walked in with my notes, thinking maybe he had questions about the export restrictions on the Swiss deal, or the renewal timing for the European exclusivity clause. I should have known better. He didn't sit. He paced, palms steepled like some kind of TED Talk guru. You've been here a long time, he started, tone soft like a eulogy, and your contributions have been foundational. But we're restructuring around a more forward-thinking model. Faster, leaner, innovative. I said nothing. He kept going, like he had to fill the space with words to drown out the silence. It's about alignment, vision. You've done your part, but we're going in a new direction now. I finally asked, "Is this a termination?" He gave that little smirk again, like a man who practiced facial expressions in the mirror. "Think of it as retirement," he said, drawing out the word like it was a gift. "Let's be honest, you're old school. Time to let younger minds run things." I looked down at my laptop, still open from the last compliance review. I'd been auditing our IP trail before the call, making sure the reference codes for the trust were intact. All of it. Clean, time-stamped, legal. The BX Core patent transfer still sat unsigned. Mutual consent required. Inventor employment status required. They had neither. I closed the laptop slowly. Didn't say a word about the trust agreement I drafted with our IP counsel back in 2016, when we first realized just how valuable BX Core might be. Didn't remind him that every iteration of that technology, from pre-prototype to regulatory finalization, was registered under that holding. My holding. For safekeeping, they said. Standard practice until everything cleared the final phase. But somehow, in their eagerness to move forward, they forgot to circle back. I didn't argue, because Callan wasn't the first boy in a suit to underestimate the woman who kept the ship running while others held the microphone. But he might be the last to learn that lesson this painfully. I stood up, straightened my blazer, looked him in the eye, nodded once, and walked out. His assistant caught my eye on the way back to my office. She looked pale. She'd seen the meeting title on the calendar. She knew. Everyone always knew. I cleared out that afternoon. Didn't need more than one box. The photo of my first team, a framed copy of our original patent, and a plaque from a 2007 engineering award they'd forgotten existed. Left the rest. Books, mugs, plaques, symbols of loyalty that didn't mean anything in a company allergic to memory. I left behind no drama, no tearful speeches, no emails to all staff. I'd learned long ago that noise fades, but documentation? Documentation echoes. On my way out, I paused by the server room, not to reminisce, just to breathe it in one last time. That hum, the constant quiet rhythm of power. Unassuming, unmoving, just like me. They thought I was done, that I'd retire quietly and disappear into soft hobbies and slow mornings. They had no idea the foundation they'd just bulldozed still belonged to me, and when the licensed team in Zurich realized that ownership hadn't legally transferred, the real reorg would begin. That evening, the building felt colder than usual, sterile, like it already forgot my name. Maybe it had. You spend 32 years brushing fingerprints off a machine, and they still act like you were never there. I slid my old ID badge through the security checkpoint one last time. No one said anything. No farewell speech, no commemorative cake in the break room, not even a signature on the back of a goodbye card. Just silence and the low hiss of the HVAC, like even the walls were embarrassed. I packed slowly. There wasn't much to take. I'd kept my space lean, never trusted permanence in a place that treated legacy like clutter. I left the old photo, though. The one of our original team, back when we still soldered boards by hand and called each other after hours to talk through bugs. That team was long gone. Retired, dead, replaced. I couldn't bring myself to carry their faces out with me. Like I was erasing them too. Let it stay on that desk like a ghost in plain sight. I took the folder labeled BX Trust Patent Transition Drafts, slipped it into my tote without a word. That document, unsigned, airtight, perfectly legal, was the quietest weapon I'd ever built. It didn't scream or blink or hum. It just sat there, holding value no one bothered to measure correctly. They thought the asset was the core technology. It wasn't. It was the signature they never got. My inbox still had 9,403 unread messages, most from people trying to schedule meetings I would no longer attend. I flagged a few for deletion, then stopped myself. Let them wonder. Let them forward, CC, escalate, and wait. They'd realize eventually the silence wasn't a glitch. It was a message. When I dropped off my badge, Callan's assistant stood to meet me. Polished, young, with that rehearsed empathy they teach in onboarding workshops. She forced a smile that barely made it past her teeth. Best of luck in retirement, Mr. Rowe. I blinked once, let the name hang in the air like static. She corrected herself quickly. I mean, Ms. Rowe, sorry, I didn't. I nodded once. No apology needed. Her tone said enough. They'd already filed me under irrelevant. I turned and walked out. No suitcase, no commemorative clock, just the heavy click of the door behind me and the soft whisper of 32 years condensed into a closing latch. Out in the parking lot, my car sat where it always did, in the back corner, under the burnt-out floodlight. I liked it there. Less foot traffic. Quieter. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, watching the building. My phone buzzed a few times. A few LinkedIn pings to, "Are you okay?" Texts from engineers who were too green to understand what just happened, but smart enough to feel the shift. I didn't reply. I drove home through the industrial corridor, past the original Brechtel warehouse. It was boarded up now. A relic. Like me, apparently. But inside those walls, I'd built the original BX Core prototype with my own hands. I still remembered the way it sparked when we finally got the load balance right. The whole team had cheered. That moment had value, more than they knew. I made myself a cup of tea that night. No celebration, no tears, just quiet, routine. My cat jumped onto the counter and stared at me like she knew something had shifted. She wasn't wrong. They thought the chapter was closed. What they didn't realize was they never even read the prologue, and the story they'd built, it still had my name on the title page. The morning light hadn't even reached the hallway outside my bedroom before my phone started vibrating like it owed someone money. 207 missed calls. Not texts, not emails. Calls. My voicemail was full. Somewhere around message number 12, it stopped recording. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, legal extensions, out-of-office ops managers trying to sound calm and failing, even a few anonymous DC area codes, probably the international licensing partners realizing the rug had been pulled out from under them. Then I saw the name that made me sit up, Frank Brechtel, the founder himself. Semi-retired, but still clinging to board influence like a barnacle. He'd built Brechtel systems out of garage fumes and borrowed capital, back when all we had were notepads, thermocouples, and sheer spite. We weren't friends, but we shared something rarer, memory. He was one of the only ones left who remembered how fragile the foundation was in those first years, and how many times I kept it from cracking. His voicemail was short, uncharacteristically blunt. "Why do you still own the BX Core patent?" I could almost hear the silence in the boardroom when he said it aloud. I imagined Callan with his tie loosened and his hands buried in his hair, legal flipping through the agreement binder like the clause would magically vanish. I poured myself coffee and waited 5 full minutes before returning Frank's call. "Morning," I said. He didn't waste time. "They're telling me the transfer never went through." It didn't. Why the hell not? "There's a clause," I said calmly, sipping from my chipped ceramic mug. "Final ownership only transfers upon mutual signature, and I was still holding it for clearance when you brought Callan in. So sign it." I took another sip. "I'm no longer an employee, Frank." Dead air. He knew what that meant. See? The clause wasn't buried. It was right there in the middle of page 3. I'd written it that way on purpose. Clear, bold, underlined. No one could accuse me of trickery. The BX Core patent, from inception through every regulatory checkpoint, had remained legally housed within the Core Legacy Trust, of which I was the sole custodian. The company didn't own the IP. They had rights to use it, pending final transfer, which required 2 things, my signature and active employment. They had neither. That clause wasn't malice. It was protection, meant to shield the tech from being sold off or diluted before it was fully baked, meant to give the company time to review licensing risks without leaking control. And it worked, for years, until someone decided I was too old school to matter. Frank exhaled on the other end. I heard papers shuffling. Do they know? They're figuring it out, slowly. They pulled the licensing packet for the EU launch. It doesn't include custodial chain clearance. That's a problem, I said. He didn't laugh. They'll offer you something, he said. Equity, a contract, consulting gig. I'm not interested in charity. He paused. I didn't say it would be charity. I let the silence hang. We both knew the weight of what wasn't being said. The company's golden goose, their miracle tech, their valuation rocket fuel was still mine. Not emotionally, not figuratively, legally, and not because I schemed for it, because I documented everything. Somewhere in a steel drawer in Legal's archive sat a version of the draft transfer with sticky notes still on it. Pending final sign-off. To be revisited post-clearance. Check with IP team. All dated. All useless now. By 10 a.m., my inbox had shifted. Less frantic. More careful. Legal phrase things like seeking clarification on document status and wondering if you had capacity for a brief discussion about patent custodianship. I ignored them. At 11:12, a board member I hadn't heard from in years sent a single-line message. Is this salvageable? I didn't reply, because what they were asking wasn't legal. It was emotional. They wanted to know if I'd forgotten how they treated me, if they could fix 32 years of oversight with a rushed contract and a LinkedIn announcement, if I'd quietly step aside, again, just because it would be cleaner that way. I made lunch, a grilled cheese, classic, no frills. Just like the early days, they didn't own the tech. They never had. They just assumed I'd always be there when they reached for it. Frank called again. His voice was thinner this time, less steel, more static, the kind of tone you hear from a man who spent the last 6 hours watching confidence curdle into chaos. We want to make this right, he said. Let's talk. Consulting fee, some equity reconsolidation, maybe a board advisor seat. We're not trying to ice you out. This was just a misunderstanding. I let him finish. No interruptions, just silence on my end and the sound of him filling it with hopeful PR language. But I'd seen this script before. It always started with olive branches dipped in gold and ended with a clause that looped back control. They weren't offering a seat at the table. They were building a trap door under it. I opened the trust dashboard on my second screen. BX Core registered. Custodian, Roe Legacy Trust. Status, active, renewed, March 12th, protected through 2029 under the extended jurisdiction filing. All notarized, all compliant. No missing links, no gaps to exploit. Their licensing deal, an $80 million package with a Belgian energy consortium, was frozen pending IP verification. Investors were flooding the ops team with questions. Compliance flagged the whole export clearance as unstable. And all roads led back to a single unsent email. Mine. I pulled up a blank message window, typed exactly 10 words. Happy to engage counsel. All documents are time-stamped and compliant. Sent. No signature, no warmth, just legal posture in plain language. An hour later, a senior partner from their outside counsel firm sent a follow-up. Polite. Measured. Panicked behind the punctuation. She asked if I had availability for a quick call. Attached a copy of the original development agreement, as if I hadn't read it more times than the company's mission statement. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a walk. The air was sharp, crisp enough to make you blink. I wandered past the university library where we first workshopped the energy conversion equations in the late 2000s. We used to run simulations on borrowed grad lab time and handwritten code. The students had no idea the tech they were tripping over in their internships would one day be worth close to $1 billion, or that their department's whiteboard still had the first BX Core schematic etched faintly beneath layers of new equations. Back home, my inbox had multiplied. Legal escalation notices. Requests for clarification. HR trying to initiate a reconciliation call. But none of them addressed the core issue. They thought I wanted back in. I didn't. They thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. They thought power was about presence. It wasn't. The real power had already transferred. Quietly. Years ago. Through a network of chain of custody documents, verified timestamps, and renewal confirmations filed under the trust. Every update filed, every clause executed, every name in place. Callan finally emailed that evening. I'd like to speak personally and clear the air, he wrote. We regret how things were handled. Let's find a productive path forward. No subject line, just desperation in plain text. I closed the tab. If they wanted the path forward, they'd have to pay the toll. And I'd already built the gate. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in, a misphrased bullet point on a licensing FAQ, a compliance officer's panicked Slack ping, an investor asking why the IP registration didn't match the company's name on the prospectus. Then, finally, a memo, circulated quietly but bleeding red between the lines. Legal had read deeper. The original development agreement, signed back in 2012, had a clause buried right in Section 4.2. Inventors retain perpetual control over proprietary developments unless ownership is formally reassigned under notarized bilateral consent. Bilateral, notarized, consensual. And I'd filed nothing of the sort. They found the emails, years of them, showing intention, sure, plans, drafts, discussion threads that ended with pending signature and circle back post-approval. But intention doesn't transfer IP, signatures do, and I didn't give them mine. In fact, last spring, while they were too busy hiring innovation officers and slashing veteran budgets, my trust's legal automation service had quietly processed the BXCore patent's 5-year renewal. Auto payment confirmed. Notarized jurisdictional refresh submitted. Confirmation email. Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Your holding remains secure. It was clockwork. Silent. Inescapable. By midweek, the licensing summit team had delayed the European rollout indefinitely, pending internal review. One of their sales VPs tried to rewrite the pitch deck to downplay the BXCore's role. Too late. Investors had already seen it headlined in 3 rounds of forecasts, $950 million in projected licensing value, 5-year growth tied to exclusive European usage rights. Except now, technically, they didn't own it. The panic showed in small ways. A board calendar invite that said emergency session, an internal memo with the subject line, clarification needed, custodial definitions. And then the real crack. Callan's assistant submitted a revision request to HR asking to postpone his executive spotlight interview scheduled for the trade press. He was disappearing, backpedaling, the golden boy image melting in real time. Inside counsel tried to frame the lapse as a historical clerical oversight. Cute. But contract law doesn't deal in poetry. It deals in ink and timestamps. And the embedded clauses I'd written weren't suggestions. They were triggers, built to hold up in court, built to withstand ignorance. There was a particular line they kept tripping over. Section 5.6c. No assignment shall be valid absent concurrent verification of custodial consent by the inventor and legal confirmation of employment status at the time of transfer. It was bolded, underlined, twice. When I first wrote that clause, I remember one of the junior attorneys asking me, "Isn't this a little, defensive?" I told her, "It's not defensive, it's a seatbelt. You only notice it when someone tries to drive off without checking who's in the car." Well, they'd floored the accelerator and now the dashboard was lighting up. I didn't have to say a word. The document spoke louder than I ever could. Decades of filing discipline, every development log traced, every version iteration cross-referenced. I'd even tagged the first schematic under the original engineering repo with a version lock tied to my trust. They could rebuild the pitch deck, but they couldn't unsign the past, and they couldn't unlock a future that no longer belonged to them. Because while they chased spotlights and startup jargon, I embedded permanence, in law, in structure, in silence. And now the structure was speaking. They didn't send an email this time. They sent a person. A man in a gray suit with soft shoes and a leather folio he never let out of his hands. He didn't introduce himself as legal or corporate affairs. He called himself a bridge. His words, not mine. He asked to meet somewhere neutral. We settled on a small cafe near the old design lab. Ironic, considering how many of our early prototypes were sketched on napkins just a few blocks from there. I picked the table in the back near the window. I didn't need to see him arrive. I needed him to see I was already there. He sat down, took a breath like he was about to dive underwater, and opened with, "Ms. Rowe, we're hoping to move forward together." Then came the pitch. Reinstatement. Not a contractor. Full employment. Executive level. My own division if I wanted it. They'd even rebuild the role to better reflect my legacy. Full retroactive equity options going back 10 years. Backdated vesting schedule. A public apology if that mattered to me. Callan would step back from day-to-day IP matters. They'd put out a joint statement, tie it all up in a bow. It was well rehearsed. He said it like he believed it, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror, maybe even meant it. But here's the thing. When you've already been erased once, you stop trading in intentions. I listened politely, didn't interrupt, let him get through every bullet point in that precious folio. Then I slid across my own, a single page, license agreement proposal, BX Core IP family, terms, exclusive license, 5 years, renewable upon mutual agreement, rate, market standard valuation pegged to third-party audits, conditions, no transfer, no sublicensing without prior written consent, all data usage to be reported quarterly, violations terminate the license, custodial ownership remains with the Rowe Legacy Trust. He scanned it once, blinked, then again. No discount? He asked, genuinely confused. No, but you built this with them. No, I built it before they realized what it was. They funded phases. I built the core. He cleared his throat. Frank was hoping for a resolution that reflects partnership. I leaned back. So was I 3 weeks ago, before they scrubbed my name off the project directory and called me a liability. Silence. He flipped the page over, as if something might be hiding there. May I ask, he said slowly, are you planning to license this to others? I already have. He didn't respond. 2 mid-size energy startups, 1 academic consortium, all non-exclusive, non-competing verticals. But yes, the license isn't exclusive unless they pay for exclusivity. He nodded, not because he agreed, but because he understood. The math was shifting. Their miracle IP wasn't theirs. Their valuation pitch now sat on rented land, and I owned the lease. They'll need time, he said. Take it, I said. But the licensing summit in Zurich is still scheduled for next quarter. If they don't lock exclusivity by then, the rate adjusts to post-market. He blinked. It goes up? It goes public. I stood, took the folio with me, left him the single-page proposal, watched through the glass as he stared down at it like it was written in a language he used to know but forgot how to speak. Power didn't shift in the boardroom. It shifted here, at a quiet cafe table with a single page and a steady voice that didn't need volume to be heard. They thought they were offering me redemption. But I wasn't waiting to be invited back in. I was setting the price for entry. The summit hall in Zurich buzzed with the kind of energy only money and ego can generate. Suits, screens, translators whispering into earpieces. You could feel the tension in the air. Not just deals being made, but futures being wagered. When I walked in, heads didn't turn. Not yet. I wasn't wearing a name badge from a company, just a plain one with a QR code and the word speaker. Most assumed I was someone's advisor, someone behind the curtain. Then the MC announced the next panel, IP Sovereignty in Emerging Energy Markets. My name echoed across the marble walls. Marlene Rowe, chairman of the Core Legacy Trust. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, the room shifted. Eyes turned. Phones came out. A few murmurs. A few widened eyes from execs who suddenly realized they'd skipped something in their pre-brief. Not former Brechtel engineer, not independent consultant. Chairman of the trust that owned the crown jewel of their industry. Brechtel had paid the licensing fee. They had to. Last minute, expedited. A 7-figure wire to ensure exclusive rights were secure before the summit began. Publicly, they called it a strategic partnership renewal. Internally, I'm told they rewrote their IP custodianship policy the night after the transfer hit the register. Inventor clauses, consent checklists, clause training for execs. All those years thinking process was the enemy, and now they were building monuments to the very thing they discarded. I didn't gloat. Didn't smile when I saw Callan sitting 3 rows back, flanked by PR and legal, expression locked in a polite grimace. He didn't speak. Didn't ask a question. Didn't blink when the moderator introduced me with a phrase I hadn't heard in decades. The architect of modern energy custody standards. Because I was. Always had been. They just never said it out loud until now. The panel itself was smooth. I outlined how we'd structured the BX Core licensing pipeline, how the trust allowed for flexible custodianship without relinquishing control, how embedded compliance could actually accelerate, not hinder innovation. I wasn't just speaking legalese. I was laying out the roadmap for a world where inventors weren't just tools, they were anchors. Afterward, a cluster of execs approached, some to shake hands, some to pitch, some to apologize without using the word. One whispered, "You made us all look under our hoods." I nodded. That was the point. I caught a glimpse of Frank in the crowd. He didn't wave, just gave a nod, tight, measured, the kind of nod you give when you know the balance of power has shifted and it's not shifting back. As I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the river, my phone buzzed with new meeting invites. Foreign energy boards, academic consortiums, 2 mid-sized competitors asking to explore alignment. They all use the same word now, alignment, not acquisition, not employment, because they understood something Brechtel didn't until they had to rent their own future back from a woman they wrote off. I didn't take every meeting, just the ones that started with, "We'd like to listen." That's the thing about being underestimated. Once the spotlight turns back on you, they can't unsee you, not when you own the light it shines from. The first check arrived by courier, not wire transfer, not automated deposit. A real envelope, thick cream stock, Brechtel Systems logo embossed in faint gray across the seal. Inside was the payment confirmation, a brief letter from legal, sterile but respectful, and a quarterly license disbursement check made out to the Core Legacy Trust. My trust. Signed, countersigned, notarized. There was something poetic about it. All the years they ignored my initials and margin notes, stripped my name from pitch decks, wrote off my input as overly cautious. And now? They couldn't even process a quarterly report without writing my name at the top of a check. Their valuation held, for now. The market never cared who built the engine, just that it ran. But the internal story had changed. Board members knew, legal knew, investors certainly knew. The crown jewel they once claimed as their own, now rented, line by line, from the person they showed the door. I didn't raise hell. I didn't launch a campaign. I didn't even grant interviews. I just let the paperwork speak. And while Brechtel paid to maintain the illusion of continuity, I expanded. Last quarter, I signed 3 additional licensing agreements, non-exclusive, sector-specific. One was a European clean energy firm with deeper infrastructure and a far more respectful engineering culture. They asked smart questions, listened carefully. Their VP of R&D opened our first call with, "We studied your clause architecture. It's surgical. We'd like to build our IP governance around it." Imagine that. Brechtel taught the industry how to dismiss quiet legacy. Now they were teaching it how to pay for it. Someone once asked me if I felt guilty licensing to a competitor. If this was revenge, it wasn't. I didn't sabotage them, didn't leak, didn't gloat. I just kept the receipts, the emails, the filing trails, the renewal confirmations, the unbroken chain of custody. Proof that while others were building empires on assumptions, I was documenting foundations. And when the dust settled, ownership didn't follow the loudest voice in the room. It followed the only one who never needed to shout. Now, every quarter, they write the name they once erased. Every summit, they cite the framework they once called too rigid. And every deal I sign under my own terms is a quiet reminder. Some power doesn't fade. Some legacy doesn't need applause. Because when it's written, signed, and held in your own hand, they don't just remember you. They report to you.